Armchair historian. What is that? I know nothing about this stuff. D-Day from the German perspective. That sounds fun. Life in Nazi Germany. Oh, I think we found the channel. Shout out to the guy. I'm gonna like the video. No comments. I think he knows what he's doing.
This video is sponsored by Brilliant. More on that later.
Armchair historian. Never heard that channel before.
I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair historian.
Oh,
Today's video, what was life like in
Dude, I always respect these kids, man. I mean, this guy looks obviously very young. And one day, he had this idea to make a YouTube channel where he shares historical stuff with nice animations. And probably makes a lot of money now. I always respect that so much, man. It's so crazy that you have to do warnings like this, right? I do not condone Nazism in any form. Yeah, obviously, man. But you have to do this because there's so many fucking retards out there, man.
One tries to imagine what life was like for the average German between the years of 1933 and 1945. What comes to mind? Many would likely envision it as a drab, nightmarish, totalitarian dystopia.
Not true.
And in many ways, this was true. Certainly for the sections of society that the Nazis firmly repressed.
That's true.
But how much different
But for Germans, man, they love this shit. I think a big part in this whole thing is also that in this time, in 1933, and after the Great Depression and a lot of the contract of Versailles stuff, lots of Germans just felt empty and bored. There was nothing going on. Their life sucked, their job sucked, and a lot of these people said that also in interviews. I was just in Nuremberg last year. Check out my VOD on that. Where these people just felt empty lives, and Hitler and the Nazi Party gave them a purpose. It made them feel something. It made them feel being part of something, which shows in the end the psychology of people joining this fucking bullshit. They feel alone and empty, and they want to be part of something. You see it even, I think this still applies nowadays with corona deniers. These people, they're missing something in life. They don't love themselves. They don't love their lives. So they look for these groups on Facebook. Oh yeah, corona isn't real. It's Bill Gates. You just want to be part of something, and especially in 1933, where there was no entertainment, no phones, no nothing, there was this vibe that these people just wanted to be part of this Nazi thing.
Up to Hitler's standards. Before we address the life of the average citizen, we must first understand what life was like for minorities. And as can be imagined, the rights of these groups were
So it's very interesting. I'm going to pause a lot here because this is a reaction, right? If I just watch the video, that's actually just stealing content. I would guess, again, I don't know, that a lot of these minorities, like Jews and Sinti and Roma and stuff, they didn't even see it coming, I think, these poor people. They will literally be like, I would guess, I mean, that's what you see in movies a lot. They will sit at home and be like, oh man, shit is getting worse and worse. But I think they would never have thought, a lot of them would have not thought that they're gonna go to fucking camps, bro.
As soon as Hitler took power in 1933,
I think a lot did not see that shit coming, man.
Teachers, professors, engineers, and administrators were excluded from government employment. Within the first few months of Hitler's election, the Nazis used their newly acquired power to orchestrate what would be known as Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night, in which thousands of
Yesterday was 76 years freedom of Auschwitz. I was watching the German news today, and the German news did a special thing today where they just talked about Jewish issues for 30 minutes.
Which businesses, homes, and synagogues were burned or otherwise vandalized, their owners beaten and arrested. By 1941, almost all of Germany's remaining Jewish population, which 10 years earlier had numbered over 500,000, were imprisoned in concentration camps. The Nazis embarked on an ideologically fueled campaign against virtually all minorities and marginal groups of society, including gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and ethnic Slavs.
Why Jehovah's Witnesses? Why? I want to be educated. Aren't Jehovah's Witnesses a kind of sub-branch of Christians or some shit? I actually have no fucking idea, bro. Because they're considered cult.
Methods used in this campaign was forced sterilization. In the words of Richard Evans in his book, The Third Reich in Power, in essence, the Nazi regime was using sterilization to crush those areas of society.
I always say this, I think the Nazis was the closest the human race ever come to evil. Like, all around human history, you have bad motherfuckers doing bad shit. But I feel like the Nazis was the closest we ever were to fucking pure evil. Like fucking Isengard, Orcs, Mordor, Sauron. Shit, man.
That did not conform to the Nazi
Like, they legit
ideal.
had little skulls everywhere.
Another particular aspect
like, if you were a Nazi, wouldn't you be like, man, I have skulls everywhere.
Is the
Are we the Urukai, bro? Are we the bad ones?
Which sought to systematically breed out those the Nazis deemed Untermenschen, or subhuman. For example, state-appointed physicians were authorized and instructed to euthanize children that were considered by the Nazis to be unworthy of life. Up to 100,000 Germans, including 20,000 children, were euthanized between 1939
Japanese Empire
and
also came close. True.
1941.
True.
Now that we understand the experiences of those the Nazis persecuted, let's examine how life was for everyday citizens. While the role of men in society under the new regime was not much different from that of the previous one,
women were pushed into the role, be a mother of the German people. Take the mother role.
Women experienced a variety of new expectations. The Nazis introduced what they saw as traditional German values for women, which included modesty,
That was the
dedication
good times,
to
boys,
Christian,
man, and now
in
I
this
have to
case,
clean
Nazified
the apartment
values,
myself.
and most
By the way,
of
disclaimer, beam, 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 everything I say here is a joke. The 3Ks. Wait, what does that say? The 3Ks, Kinder, Küche, Kirche. Yeah, the 3Ks also means something else in America.
A crucial component of their plans to expand the German nation. In fact, a civil award, the German Mother's Cross, was established and given to women who bore at least 4 children. In schools, students were taught a curriculum that was designed to encourage discrimination and discourage racial mixing. To quote Richard Evans again, teachers and pupils greet each other at the beginning and end of every lesson with the Nazi salute. The pupils list.
I think what's always so interesting about Nazi Germany is how quickly you can. It shows how quickly you can shift a society. Just a few years, everybody is full in, bro. Most of the people. It's crazy how quickly you can do that.
Listen to major political speeches on
Thank
the
you,
radio
young
in
Pelt
the
Stalin.
school hall.
Thank you for the
As we
23.
mentioned, the primary objective of the Nazi school system was to ensure that the party's ideology became ingrained in the minds of students, something which was intended to produce loyal soldiers for future.
I remember when I was working in the supermarket, there was this old grandpa. I liked this guy. He was a good lad. He was a fine lad, and he would always brag. He would always say, when I was young, I still was in Hitler's school. I did the salute. I was so proud, and now everything is to shit. He would always tell the story how as a child he would salute the Führer in school, and he would always tell the story all the time.
Dating all the
There's
way
a
back
lot of
from
old people like that in
1922,
Germany.
the Hitler
Lots
Youth,
of them.
And later on its female branch, the League of German Girls, was meant to prepare boys for military service and girls for motherhood.
Is this
These
guy, this
organizations were
YouTuber, painting this
incredibly
himself?
popular in Germany,
If yes,
and by
good job, man. I mean,
1939,
no wonder this
over
guy has millions of
90%
subs.
of Germany's children were part of the Hitler Youth. During this time, even more innocuous institutions of German society began to take a National Socialist slant, as can be seen with the Positive Christianity movement, which was a state-sponsored program to unite all of Germany's Protestant churches into one national church that would legitimize and support the Nazi agenda. Government, under the direction of propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, distributed millions of inexpensive radios to the people in order to make sure that important
Very
political
clever
messages
move back in the day
could
to
reach
give
them.
everybody radios.
These measures,
Such a
however,
good
often
propaganda
did
tool.
not produce that most of the German people could not be fully indoctrinated. The government enforced its ideal German state through legislation. For example, it was required for both men and women aged 19 to 25 to commit a 6-month tour of public labor, in which they fulfilled the Nazi concept of a social labor force. Women were then allowed to return home, but men were conscripted into the Wehrmacht, or German military. This provided a steady source of manpower for the ultra-militaristic
The armament was the primary
Nazi
factor of
state.
economic growth in Germany
The Nazis
pre-war.
also introduced the Volkswagen, or people's car,
Oh,
which was
wait,
intended
VW
to
was made by
provide
the
each
Nazis?
German
What?
household. The Great Depression was taking a disastrous toll on the German people before the Nazis were elected. By 1933, unemployment stood at 35%, and inflation
What
was
does
rampant.
Wehrmacht mean? Means like defensive power, defensive force. In a
Naturally,
way.
the Nazis promised to improve the state of the German economy, something which earned them many votes in the election of 1933.
I've been in the Great Depression for a long time.
Their first
It
priority
never
was
stopped
to
for me.
reduce the dismal amount of unemployment in Germany by initiating large public works projects, such as the construction of canals and the Autobahn, or highway. Hitler boasted his success in spite of the fact that many
Nazis
of the
hosted the
employment
Olympics.
statistics that were used
By the way, the
excluded
Nazi Olympics was the first ever thing the human race did that sent waves out into space. Meaning the first thing aliens will ever receive from Earth will be the waves from that TV screening of the Nazi Olympics. So the first thing they will see is like...
significant portions of the population, such as Jews and soldiers. Though the Nazis' economic reforms have generally been considered
love reporting.
effective, it took years for the unemployment rate to actually drop to stable levels. Despite promising peace both during and after his election, Hitler would once again involve the German people in a large-scale war.
I'll never forget, man, when I was a kid, I went to Berlin with the school and we were looking at the Reichstag and you could still see all the bullet holes in it, man. Nowadays they're gone. I think they what's the word? They took care of it, but when I was a kid, I saw the bullet holes in the
As the need
Reichstag.
for resources to
Fucking
power the
crazy,
German
bro.
military grew larger.
But they were everywhere, man. They were everywhere. And I felt like, even as a young kid playing Call of Duty, what the fuck are you Russians doing? There was bullet holes everywhere. Like, are you just shooting at the building randomly?
Larger,
everywhere. Restored, yeah, renovated, restored.
Hitler's conquest, something which escalated the war onto a global scale. As the conflict raged on, it quickly
they just shot at the building,
to most
not even giving a fuck.
Even those within Germany, that the idealistic utopia that the Nazis hoped for would never come to fruition. The sheer number of casualties that the war produced.
To be honest, man, this is kind of misleading. He didn't tell us that much about how the average citizen lived in Germany, man. I was expecting something else here. Yeah, now you talk about the war. You're not really talking about the life of the average citizen.
As the country was divided between the democratic West and the communist East.
Yeah, we know that. I don't know. That was, I don't know. I would like to watch something about East Germany, true. Like, I want to, because this is my culture. Life in East Germany, that's interesting. Here we go. This is my parents, man, and this is where I live, dude.
It is August.
It's very, very interesting. Like, I was raised about East Germans, right? Everyone I ever met who was older than me was East German. And they all say the same. They all say the same. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. Most people that I know, they all say it wasn't that bad. The problem is they were not seeing the big picture of how the state was broke and not good and everything. They just saw the small picture, how in the GDR they always report that what in the GDR was very beautiful. They say, like my parents and all these older people, that everybody was working together. You know, there wasn't big money, no big belongings, no capitalism. So people would always help each other. Hey, you're a plumber, can you do my toilet? I'm a roofer, I do your roof. They would always work together and have this community feeling, and they're missing that. I hear that a lot. Very good, let's keep watching. Let's go.
1945, and the guns have gone silent across Europe. The Third Reich is no more. Its ambitions crushed beneath the overwhelming power of the Allied nations and Comintern. Yet amidst the ruins, people still remain. Although battered and beaten, the hardy German spirit still...
The craziest generation to me. I said this on stream some weeks ago. Germans in the chat. Well, I'm just mean... Again, I mean the scientific and not like, oh my god, propaganda. We Germans don't really know much about the rebuilding of our country. I feel like that. I think I'm an educated young German. I know a lot about history and Nazi time and all that stuff. But... this period from 1945 till 1955, I don't know much about, man. In my brain, it's like Germany was destroyed, gone, 10 years later, boom, it's all back. All the buildings are back. This is truly a period I feel like we don't know much about, man. Someone once told me that because the winning forces don't want us to know about this because rebuilding would make the Germans motivated and patriotic. I think I heard that once. But I just don't know much about this time, you know? I never met a German who was like, yeah, I built this country, I built houses and stuff. I never met someone like that. Very interesting.
Yours. But unbeknownst to them, they are about to become pawns in an even greater war. One fought not with guns and bombs, but with economics and ideology. At the Potsdam Conference, Germany was divided between the Allied powers. With the stroke of a pen, 16 million people fell under Soviet dominion. The two halves of the nation would now stand at odds. On one side, a capitalist buffer state against the menace of communism. On the other, a glorious socialist utopia. At least, that was the theory. Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. In today's video, we're going to take a look at what life was like in the German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany. This Soviet puppet state imagined itself as a glorious communist utopia, while Western puppet as a nightmarish dystopia.
Oh yeah, this is better.
As is so often the case, the truth is more complicated and lies somewhere between these two envisioned extremes. Before we begin today's video, I'd like to...
Once again, my whole life I was asking my parents, people around me, please explain or talk about East Germany. And they would always always just say this the same, right? It wasn't that bad. We all had jobs. We all had order. That's what they would always say.
Thank our
but again,
sponsor,
they didn't know the
Honey.
bigger picture of
Thanks
all
to the
the money
pandemic,
missing
being
and
able
stuff.
to save while shopping online has become a real skill for many people.
Sound, yes.
But it's not always easy to hunt for discounts, special offers, and coupons in the digital marketplace.
Oh, it's one of these coupons.
Fortunately,
apps?
Honey provides you with a free online shopping tool that scours the internet for promo codes and
like I can tell you guys. What do you think how much she got for this sponsorship? What do you think? What do you think, Chad? 5K? You guys are ridiculous, man. 5K, bro? This right here, Makoni, what do you think? This is like 25K, I think. 20 to 25. You disagree, Makoni? You think 10K? I don't think so. But well, not under 10K. Not under 10K. Easy, man. Easy.
As soon as the Soviets began their occupation, they treated their new subjects harshly. The defeated populace could only watch as Russian soldiers rapidly dismantled what little remained of their industrial infrastructure and shipped it back to Russia. Tens of thousands of suspected Nazis.
10 Nazi concentration camps were repurposed by the Soviets, and in total, over 120,000 people were imprisoned there. About a tenth of them died.
Sympathizers or anti-communists were rounded up and imprisoned at repurposed concentration camps. Simultaneously, the Soviets set to work laying the political foundations for a communist Germany.
Jake, I
in 1946, the occupiers forcibly merged two German political parties, the Communist Party and the Social Democratic Party, to form the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, or SED. The SED was quickly purged of all opponents of Stalinism and was then installed as the sole ruling party in the new government. In October of 1949, the Soviets formally turned over political control.
While the GDR was nominally independent, it was in practice a satellite state of USSR. Soviet troops remained in the country, and the SED policy, this blah 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 blah. A lot of Russian barracks everywhere. In Halle, I could show you like two.
Over their occupied zone to the SED, establishing the German.
A Russian soldier saved my dad once. He told me that story. He was a young teenager or kid, and they were playing in winter, and he fell into a lake. And Russian soldiers got him out of the lake and were rubbing him with vodka, because the vodka would make his body hot, and they took care of him.
Air quotes, Democratic Republic, or GDR, as a new, air quotes, independent nation. From the moment of its creation, East Germany and its people were faced with tremendous hardship. The western portion of Germany, namely the Ruhr Valley, had always been the industrial heart of the nation, and its loss left the GDR with almost no industrial capacity. This resulted in devastating shortages of most essential goods, and the population suffered from severe malnourishment. With nothing available to purchase, laborers had no incentive to work, which caused the economy to stagnate even further. As the beleaguered citizens of East Germany struggled to survive, their former countrymen in the West were already experiencing economic recovery thanks to the American aid.
Something I hate about Germany, man, is that Germans shit on each other for being East or Westerners. Especially my parents' generation. It's so much, fucking Westerners, fucking Easterners. Fucking idiots, bro. Unfortunately, because of bad shit happening, we've got separated and we're all fucking Germans, man. And they still shit on each other nowadays. I hope that my generation that was born after the fall of the wall doesn't think like this anymore. But there's still so many issues in Germany between West and East and shitting on each other.
The mass exodus from East Germany only worsened its economic conditions as young people, skilled laborers, and intellectuals vacated the country in droves. The SED attempted to counteract this brain drain with aggressive propaganda campaigns, framing the decision to leave East Germany as an act of political and moral backwardness and depravity. But there was nothing physically stopping people from leaving, and so the exodus continued. The task of halting this flow of emigration and reviving the economy fell to General Secretary of the SED, Walter Ulbricht. In 1952, Ulbricht decided that in order to accomplish this goal, he needed to follow the example of the USSR by rapidly converting East Germany into a proper communist society using a good old 5-year plan. In carrying out this plan, Ulbricht demonstrated
this construction of socialism program entailed collectivizing agriculture, investing in heavy industry, and eliminating private enterprise through discriminatory taxation. 40% of the GDR's most successful farmers fled to West Germany.
that he had truly embraced the teachings of Stalin by successfully starving his people even further and making everything much, much worse. His attempts to collectivize agriculture led to disastrous food shortages, and the high taxes on private enterprise caused those consumer goods, which had crept back onto the shelves, to disappear once again. The party tried to compensate for these new shortages by increasing worker quotas, requiring 10% more effort to earn the same wages. This last burden finally pushed people over the edge, and hundreds of thousands more fled to the west. In the summer of 1953, even after the Soviets had forced Ulbricht to dial back most of his collectivization efforts,
sometimes this makes me feel like I would have wished that the Allies would have taken Berlin.
A workers' strike broke out in East Berlin, which quickly grew into a protest demanding free elections and other reforms. The movement soon spread across the country, and within days, 340,000 people were protesting in every city and almost every large town in East Germany. The situation was dire enough that Ulbricht was forced to call on the Soviets for help, and it was only upon the arrival of their tanks and arms.
No, my grandparents were they hadn't this rebellious thing inside of them. My entire family and most people that I know from East Germany, they are more like dutiful local people. Like, I stay where I am no matter what, and I do my
soldiers that the unrest was finally quelled.
I had some friends in school,
migration to the west continued. By the beginning of the 1960s, nearly 4 million people had fled the GDR since its foundation, representing over a quarter of the country's original population.
They only know the system.
Party officials, due to its unusual status as a single city divided between Soviet East and Allied West, it was difficult to stop people from crossing the border, turning the former capital into a city-sized loophole through which over 90% of the migrants fleeing East Germany were able to escape. By 1961, the party had had enough, and finally...
The wall was officially called the Anti-Fascist Protection Rampart. Why anti-fascist, huh? Makes no sense. And was meant to keep Nazis and fascist sympathizers entering East... Well, that's a
decided
bad
to
excuse.
Close the border with the construction of the Berlin Wall. This 156-kilometer or 97-mile barrier effectively cut off the people of East Germany from the West. Where nearly 4 million had escaped since 1949, only 5,000 more would manage to abscond over the next 30 years. As the 1960s progressed, quality of life slowly improved in the GDR. After losing a...
I would have 2 Deutsche Mark, and I could buy 1 Magnum ice cream and 1 Milka.
Quarter of their number, nowadays. The remaining population of the nation slowly realized that there was no longer a shortage of housing or jobs. Production of consumer goods and strategic resources gradually increased, and by the end of the decade, East Germany had the richest economy in the Eastern Bloc. But while more goods were being produced,
the government was in control of all production, and party officials could decide to subsidize certain goods.
Not everything was consistently available. The government was in control of all production. The resulting fluctuations led to massive lines outside of stores and the widespread hoarding of common goods. Those without access to hard currency from the West were subject to the whims of the party's economic planners, and often had to wait months or even years for certain goods to become available. For example,
my parents had to, if you wanted the card, you had to wait. You go on the list and you have to wait years, literal years to get a car. Or you are a high-ranking guy in the political party. Also, you wouldn't get any apartments, man. I just talked about with Lisa's mom last weekend about this. A lot of people, like Lisa's parents, my parents, lots of parents, will just get married and have children, like me and Lisa, to have access to a better apartment. Because if you have a child, you get the apartment. So a lot of young people, because they had their jobs, they didn't have anything to do in their life, they had nothing to pursue, so they just married and got children, like me and Lisa, so they can get apartments, man.
Those wishing to purchase a sleek, stylish, high-performing East German automobile would have no trouble paying for it, but they would have to wait up to 13 years to actually receive their vehicle. Despite the long waits, standards of living in East Germany did improve significantly in the 1960s, but unrest and opposition to the communist government remained. Despite ongoing discontent, there was never another widespread rebellion like the...
What I always think is the worst thing about communism, it's their depressive architecture. Like, I was literally raised in the communist bloc. It is so trist and everything gray and everything the same and no color. No, it's so fucking sad, bro.
1953 uprising until the Soviet...
Who came up with this idea? Hey, so how do we make people happy? Let's just make the most fucking depressive architecture ever. What the fuck, bro? Like, I remember when I was a kid, when everything was still gray and shit, it was
this
so
effective
fucking
suppression
sad,
of
bro.
unrest was all thanks to the Ministry of State Security, also known as the Stasi. The Stasi was one of the most feared secret police forces in the Eastern Bloc, and between their founding...
In Halle, my home city, there's a big building, and this building has a thing. Every East German citizen from back in the day can go to this building. I was literally living 20 minutes away from it. You have to apply, and then they will give you your Stasi act. They will give you a thing like this with all the information the secret police had on you in all these years. You can literally go there. A lot of people, like my parents, they don't want to do it because they don't want to know if maybe some of their friends were actually spies and shit. It's so interesting though. You can go there and look at these files.
After German reunification, they carried out one of the most extensive mass surveillance programs in the pre-digital age.
Great movie about this. I hate German movies, but this movie got an Oscar. The Life of the Others. Das Leben der Anderen. The Life of the Others. Very good movie about this. It's about a Stasi man and how he...
they employed over 170,000 informants among the civilian population.
Dude,
although some estimates suggest there could have been as many as 500,000. There were Stasi agents in every apartment building.
TommyKay was a sperm in his dad's ballsack. I think you already showed liberal thoughts.
Every factory, every hospital and university, watching and listening for any sign of subversive or anti-communist behavior. Until 1970, dissidents identified by this surveillance network were simply arrested, dragged off somewhere, and tortured until they gave up any accomplices before being imprisoned. In the 1970s, the Stasi decided that these methods were too crude and began to employ a form of psychological warfare called Zersetzung, which literally means decomposition. These insidious tactics and mass surveillance created a culture of suspicion and fear in much of the East German populace. The eyes of the Stasi were everywhere. Despite this pervasive fear of Stasi surveillance and harsh state censorship, a vibrant and distinct art and material culture flourished in the GDR. The identity that developed within these restrictions was defined largely in opposition to the West, emphasizing the ways in which the people of East Germany were distinct from, and of course superior to, those in the West. Movies and plays produced by the state-owned studios and theaters celebrated the ordinary working-class heroes of socialism, along with...
I remember, again, this is all from experience, talking to parents from everybody all these years. What my parents and other parents, like this generation, loved was movies from the Balkan. Serbian, Croatian, Czechoslovakian, a lot of Czechoslovakian, shit ton of these movies. For example, fairy tale stuff. They would watch that a shit ton.
Who fought against fascism and imperialism. When it came to women's rights, East Germany rejected the traditional conservative gender roles still enforced in West Germany in favor for greater autonomy for women in marriage and in the workplace. Birth control was more widely accepted and available, and women were encouraged to participate in the workplace rather than remaining at home. This anti-Western, pro-communist cultural movement took hold most strongly among the older generation, while the youth, as they often do, chose to rebel. In the late 1970s and 80s, as the governments of both German nations were pushing for reconciliation and greater cooperation, cultural influences from the West began to seep in and catch on with the younger generation.
The biggest thing for East Germans, again, talking to East Germans my whole life, was getting goods from the West. Once in a while, there was a store in every city. For example, in my home city, Halle, there was a store, and that store had Western goods. I don't even know why that was allowed, I don't know, but there was a store with Western goods, and they could never pay for it. And I remember my mom was a big Michael Jackson fan, and she literally, as a young girl, she drove to Berlin, and thousands of East Germans would go to the wall and stand by the wall to hear Michael Jackson sing on the other side. They would literally just go there to hear him in the distance, man. And that was the greatest thing for them. If someone from the family would have like a business trip to the West and would bring home CDs or jeans, fucking jeans, man, it would be the biggest thing for them. In the end, my mom would always say the biggest thing for her was to receive a package from the West with Western goods.
Punk and rock music became popular, and tech-savvy teenagers became fascinated by Western video games.
Better than this shit.
This created a cultural divide in the GDR, with the old guard still stubbornly in support of the communist system that kept them fed, sheltered, and employed, while young, educated East Germans grew more and more fascinated with the West and opposed the status quo.
And this, what he's saying here right now, I think when I was in China, applies to a lot of young Chinese people, especially at university. A lot of young Chinese people are just like that.
By 1989,
Western
discontent
ideas,
with the
Western
communist
influence,
policies erupted
freedom,
into widespread protests
especially
for the first time
because they
since
received Hong Kong
1953.
radio.
And this time, the Soviet army was in no position to intervene. In November, the Berlin Wall was taken down, and the SED abolished the provision in the Constitution guaranteeing communist control of the government. The following year, East and West Germany were formally reunited. The reunification of Germany was met with approval from both sides of the old order. But the divisions between the two halves of this new nation did not disappear overnight. Many factories in the East were closed, and widespread unemployment reappeared for the first time in decades. For many, particularly less educated men who had lost the stable jobs they'd enjoyed in the communist era.
Again, this is so big. This is so big. I talked about this on stream. You now have a generation of, especially males, that lose everything. They lose their belief, their system, and they lose their jobs, and they all become alcoholics. What he's gonna say now, my dad, Lisa's dad, every human I ever known, man, all these East German in my age, this is our dads. This right here is our dads.
Particularly less educated men who had lost the stable jobs they'd enjoyed in the communist era, there was a sense that the West had finally won, and the East was now getting left behind.
Yeah. Big problem in East Germany, man. They're
even to this day,
man.
Many Germans in the East feel a sense of nostalgia for the days of the GDR, when everyone enjoyed, if not prosperity, at least stability and solidarity within the communist system.
Well said, well said.
While most historians acknowledge that East Germany was a repressive dictatorship, there are still Germans today who remember it fondly and identify more as East Germans than Germans. As always, it is impossible to simply classify a nation or its people one way or the other.
We're Germans and not East and West Germans. Nice channel, I will watch this more. Dude, this guy has a lot of cool videos, and they're short, I like that. I will react to more of this in the future, don't worry about it, boys. Well, big shout out to this guy, man. Show some love, subscribe to him. When you talk to people that saw this war, you see how much pain is in their eyes and how unnecessary this all was. As I said before, all these wars are always by crazy leaders, man. It's just the leaders.
She slipped in my fingers like sand. Further she had a man. Now I'm just sitting here sad. Oh well, ship sail. She slipped in my fingers like sand. Further she got a man. Now I'm just sitting here sad.